Hello everyone, this is Mini Ninja speaking. Welcome to today's episode of the Bootleg Breakdown program, where we're actually beginning looking at yet another knockoff Frieza figure, although this one is actually based on the first release of the Final Form Frieza figure made for the SH Figuarts line. Now, I found this a bit curious because these started noticeably popping up on eBay some time back, which is when I ordered this, and while I don't think this is actually one of the original Tong knockoffs, which for those that aren't familiar, it seemed to be actually relatively high quality for what they were at the time. This still seems to be something that is relatively, at least from the inside of the box, it looks like it's held up nicely enough. And it seems to have all the various parts, although, there is something weird going on with that, but we're going to talk about that one later. Moving on to the main figure itself, though, as we get things out of the box here, the main figure itself honestly doesn't feel too bad in the hand here. Of course, the original figure and this one are quite light. And generally speaking, in terms of the paint job, there was nothing really too complex about the shading on this particular figure to begin with, but there does seem to be a little bit of basic shading on there. The plastics themselves are a little odd in terms that some bits are shinier than others, like the upper torso is a bit of a gloss plastic, while the rest of them is a little more of a matte color. But in terms of articulation, everything seems to hold up pretty decently here. There's nothing that's too tight per se, but there's also stuff that isn't exactly too loose either. It looks like, at least in theory, it should be able to hold the pose well enough, although I do wish it was a bit tighter in points. And oh, okay, never mind, pops in well enough. As I was saying, I do wish this actually had some slightly snugger joints, if anything, because it feels kind of, it's not quite wobbly, but I'm not sure it will be able to pose too well and hold itself up once you start attaching one of the two tails here, because the original figure came with two tails. The one's a normal one, and the other one is meant for choking Goku, I believe, if you pose him with a stand in this case. And, well, if we look at there, everything seems to be fine enough for the tail. I imagine once we actually plug this into the back here, yeah, I'm pretty sure Frieza's actually going to have a hard time standing up, I'm afraid, because just something about the way that especially the legs, well, they're, like I said, they're not loose, but they're not exactly tight either. It's going to make posing this thing a bit of a pain, because even with the newer Frieza figure, there's just something about the way the feet are set up that make balancing Frieza as a whole a bit of a pain. And yeah, unfortunately, yeah, this first one is no exception either. Yeah, we're not, yeah, there was like, I'm gonna have to do something about that leg before the whole video is done, I think. Now, taking a look at Frieza's various accessories, he actually comes with quite a bit of stuff. In fact, a little more generous in this original release than what the Resurrection of F re-release or new figure ended up coming with. Namely, in this case, Frieza actually has 3 different sets of head, namely the normal expression, a bit of a yelling expression, as well as a pained expression, which I think they ended up changing out for the Resurrection of F newer figure. Now, in terms of the casting, they are a bit soft here, and as you can see there, the actual openings aren't exactly the most well set, but honestly, they tend to be pretty well handled. Same thing with the hands. Not the fanciest things by any means, in fact there's no real shading on them, and not real much paint application aside from the fingernails, but they do the job. I wish I could say the same about the crossed arms here though, which, as you're going to see, they do fit on the figure just fine, but in terms of both the casting as well as the paint job, honestly, they could use a little bit of work. This particular close-up also really shows up how there's a little bit of an inconsistency between the paint on the head in terms of the purple and what happens on the rest of the body. The one on the head seems to be a little more of a kind of a brighter pinkish or reddier purple, while the rest of them is definitely a darker, cooler purple, which stands out. So I kind of wish it was a little more consistent, but so be it. In terms of the feet in here, Frieza has 3 different sets of feet, kind of a one that has the neutral one, the stepping one, and the ones that are supposed to interact with this particular base. But I don't know if it's something about the peg size that's off, or the base itself is too small. It's just that the feet don't stick on there too well, I'm afraid. Moving on to the energy effect bits, well, everything that is same color as Frieza White has been casted in the wrong material, for lack of a better term. Particularly this energy beam effect, yeah, I don't know what to even call it at this point, but suffice to say, it's wrong, I'm afraid, and it doesn't work as it's supposed to. For a bit of proof of concept video here, here's me switching off the heads, or at least trying to, with starting off with the yelling expression, which honestly pops on there without too much effort, I should say. And honestly, it does fit on there pretty well. Feels like a good snug fit. However, you won't be seeing the paint expression on this particular footage because at this time I hadn't cleaned the opening on yet, so yeah, it's not going to fit on there. I ended up expanding it a bit with the drill bit later. And in terms of the hands, while I'm only showing 2 hands on this particular bit of footage, I did test all the other hands after the fact, kind of off camera here, and can report that everything did come on and off without any real hassle. So you basically don't have to really force these things on there. They will fit on there and interchange easily enough, which also means thankfully I don't need to resort to using any drill bits with this stuff, which is a nice change of pace, considering some of the stuff I've had to work with as of late. For about $30, I do feel this is actually a pretty decent stand-in Frieza for a general collection. Even keeping in mind that I do have the Resurrection of F-based one, the original one does have some bells and whistles that the newer figure doesn't actually have, such as the extra tail, various hands and expressions, and the stand there, which is a good nod to the manga or anime, whichever one you happen to have viewed first. And on top of that, as we take a look into the teardown bit, most of the figure actually separates pretty well and actually lends itself pretty easily to customization, as we're going to find out here. Namely, looking at the neck bit, it's your pretty standard one, with the neck peg itself being of pretty decent quality. Same with the shoulder bits for the upper torso here, which is still in one piece as you can see here. If anything, maybe the shoulders are maybe a little too tight in terms of the rotational part that's on the inside of the body on my figure, because it makes a bit of a squeaky sound when I'm trying to move them. So that is something with some shock oil I'm going to have to adjust a little bit more later. Now, in terms of this, we're actually going to kind of trim this footage here, because I already showed you what it looks like with the newer arms or the crossed arms in place. Now, moving on to the ab region on there, it's actually casted in one simple piece, which honestly does the job in this case. You don't need anything really complicated, especially with Frieza's size. And same thing with the hips in this case, which, as you can imagine, this is a 1.0 figure. You have the 1.0 style drop hips on there, which honestly do the job fairly well. Same thing with the little kind of suction cup things for the hips on there, they're just the connecting piece, as well as your standard kind of double jointed knees. Honestly, not the most complex things, maybe a little loose on my figure I find my taste, but it does the job well enough, and it's nothing that's hard to fix really. Same thing with the lower bits, there's what it looks like with the ankle joints being out of there, and speaking of which, that's the ankle joint, with the more squarish bit being the one that tops to the ankle, while the more rounded bit goes into the feet themselves. Moving on to the shoulder, your simple shoulder cover, your bicep bit, honestly it's just kind of a hollow casting on that one, to a certain degree. Pull it out in the center and just with the right grip to get them a right connection spots for the double-sided elbow joint. And in terms of the wrist joints, I should probably mention, once again, the actual wrist joints are of decent quality, which is a very nice surprise considering all the other bootlegs I tend to deal with here. And as we're taking one last look at the upper torso here, I removed the back covering, which is on this particular one and is reminiscent of what most 1.0 stuff has, where if you do so, it exposes a bit of a screw joint, not a screw joint, an actual screw I should say, at the back of it, where if you untie that screw or pull it out, you'll see that the upper torso separates fairly easy in Frieza's case. And here's what the inner mechanisms look like. It's honestly just kind of a T-square with 4 different ball joints on there, and those 2 suction cup shoulder bits that kind of help move things in place. It's worth noting on this particular knockoff though, I was having a hell of a time trying to remove those things. They're actually super stuck on there because it's a really tight fit. It doesn't restrict movement by any means, but it makes removing them an absolute pain. However, still, as you can see, the whole figure separates really nicely, which really helps with customization purposes, which is actually kind of where we're going with this figure next. Mind you, my original plan was to actually try to turn this into a First Form Frieza, but with the announcement of an official one that's going to be coming up in the next year, well, that whole plan went a little redundant. So rather, we're going to make this a bit of a more interesting sculpting experiment, namely seeing how much bulk I can add on this thing to try to turn this Final Form Frieza into a full-powered Frieza instead. And that's going to hopefully be a bit of an ongoing series to go along with the rest of my normal bootleg breakdown stuff, as well as other general knockoff and third-party reviews as stuff comes in the mail, because I'm trying to pick up a few different things all at once. Hopefully you'll be joining me for those videos in the future. For now though, thanks for watching this one, take care, and catch y'all later.